the Senate passed the what is it, the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act. This we broke down on the show last week, so I'm not gonna do a full breakdown on it again. But essentially, this bill is going to ban most products from coming from Xinjiang, China, to the United States. There were some serious U.S. Industry that lobbied against this, including Coca-Cola, because they import goods from this region, but the U.S. says that there's concentration camps there and forced Uyghur labor. We've broken down on the show, and Pat McFarland, our colleague at the Libertarian Institute, has done great work on this issue. I'm sure there are abusive labor practices. I'm sure I wouldn't want to work in the conditions of the factories in Xinjiang, China. I'm not saying this is working anywhere in the U.S. or anything like that, even maybe an Amazon warehouse to compare it to. But at the same time, life isn't that great in Xinjiang, China. It's an impoverished area of the world. A lot of China is poor. It's not just the Uyghurs that are poor. And so, I think it's far more complicated than just to say these are concentration camps and we have to ban all goods from there. Now, my understanding is that at least before this passed the Senate, the Biden administration's plan was to sign this bill. I don't know if, they actually go through with it or what happens.
I think it said they welcomed it after the Senate passed it. There was some.
So then they will go through and go ahead and
indicating,
sign it.
That they support
it.
I
had read that was the case before the House passed it, but sometimes they bluff. They think Joe Manchin, but of course something like this, I'm sure they knew that it was going to pass. I think it had quite a bit of support. The U.S. also has been just blacklisting a bunch of Chinese firms and individuals. These sanctions have come from the Biden administration, like the White House, the Treasury Department, the Commerce Department, and have targeted different areas and parts of China. And some people have actually been double sanctioned or more. And this does actually change the status, though. Sometimes it doesn't matter, but in this case it does, because the U.S. had sanctions on Chinese officials that, prevented U.S. businessmen from doing business with China, but wouldn't necessarily prevent a second foreign country from doing business with the sanctioned people in China. But now, we've put them on different blacklists, and so 5 people in China were added to the blacklist for violating human rights, quote unquote, in Hong Kong. And so now the U.S. is threatening secondary sanctions against anyone who trades with those people. So understand that this is a really complicated world that, if you're in global finance, I mean, it must be an absolute mess if you're doing business with China. Just, it's constantly evolving who's on the sanctions list, what company is. I don't think they're very accurate on, who they actually blacklist or not. There's no due process, really. I mean, companies have sued to try to get off of them, saying that it's based on false information, all that. And usually it's, or almost always, I don't know of any case there's actually been a success. But, to try to, again, figure out, oh, I could do business with this person this week, even though they're sanctioned, but next week they're still sanctioned, but now I can't do business with them. And just a huge mess, and it has to cause so much artificial poverty in the global wealth system. But go ahead, Connor.
Well, I was going to say, I think I've seen in Dave's reporting as well about Dave DeCamp that as far as the Xinjiang issue goes, and the risk about Xinjiang as well is as you're talking about how they make it more and more difficult for international businesses to work with China. But a big part of it, as well as, the Hawks have been calling for decoupling and kind of, you take this hard line sort of position and you put it out there into the zeitgeist, and then we don't decouple from China right away, but they start sort of testing that out in a way of now with the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act. They sort of test run decoupling from various regions of China, and then it's gonna get worse from here and there. And they talk about how they have to. It sounds like companies, like you said, Nike and Coca-Cola have disputed these claims, but you'd have to go through a process. They say that what does it say in the law, that they need to present clear and convincing evidence that they're not using forced labor. And what's interesting about that, so who knows how tedious and full of red tape and maybe even dishonest, I'm sure, that process would be. But Dave has pointed out that it sounds like the claims about these companies using forced labor, which they've complained about, are coming because they say they're from these third-party groups. I think Dave says that the claims come from this group called the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, which is funded by like Lockheed and other military industrial complex firms. So similar to the case of Adrian Zenz and these other sort of, who comes from, neocon think tanks, I believe, like the Jamestown Institute, you have all kinds of conflicts of interest, to borrow a phrase, where you have the military industrial complex funding these claims about China, which only serve to ramp up tensions. And then, as we've discussed previously on the show, if you cut off trade with a country like China, it makes conflict so much more likely.
Right. And this is like taking chipping away at the trade between the U.S. and China. And right now, the trade relationship is massive, but if you get rid of trade from this province and that province, and you ban trade with this sector and that sector, eventually it's going to get smaller and smaller and smaller, and make the idea of potential war with China more and more likely. And also, there's just so much in the American zeitgeist right now that these concentration camps just exist as something that everybody knows, that China's human rights abuses are the worst thing on the planet and the most intolerable thing on the planet and all that. And so all this is just absolutely justified, unquestionably.
I noticed briefly that Dave DeCamp mentioned on the Scott Horton show recently that there's a report out of the AP where they say that apparently people aren't in the camps that supposedly held like 1 million people, which I believe that statistic came from the NED, and and Pat has covered where that comes from as well. I believe that it's very questionable. But what's funny is they now say that they're not in there. And I read a piece from Axios about the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, and the way that they're, previously, if you read a piece on China, especially regards to Xinjiang, they would offhand, without citing, sort of like when they go Iran-backed Houthis, they don't feel like they have to hyperlink it. Whereas if I did something like that, well, I wouldn't do something like that, but I wouldn't get past an editor. But you can do that if you're in the mainstream media. So anyway, now they say, instead of saying there's 1 million people in these camps, they say where 1 million people are believed to have passed through the camp. Like, I just noticed how they're massaging the rhetoric now, because apparently, but as you said, in our culture here, like that's already a done deal. Like they just beat that into everybody's head. So everybody just assumes that there's 1 million people in concentration camps, and if you don't believe that, you're a CCP shill or something like that.
Yeah. A couple other stories on China before I get to the Biden personnel here. The U.S. is apparently planning to build software that is going to predict China's response to military action. This is one of the more terrifying things that I have read in the past couple of weeks. Not necessarily because I think the software is going to predict that we need to go to nuclear war with China or something like that, but the people who build this software are not going to be people who work at the Quincy Institute or antiwar.com. They're going to be China haunts, and they're going to build the software to play out the scenario that they have and fantasize about in their heads, which seems awfully like to lead to war between the U.S. and China. And so I don't know how concerning that is, Connor, but it is fairly concerning that they're building this kind of system. Also, I do think there's, kind of just a sense in America from the population that, having a computer to back up your analysis is somehow like a justification for making a decision. So, the computer said that running this exercise through the Taiwan Strait wouldn't cause an issue with China, so not my fault, says the general in charge.
The reporting on this is weird too, because they're like, well, we thought we should do this after they complained so vocally after that passage to the Taiwan Strait the U.S. and the Canadians did a few months ago, and they always, the People's Liberation Army spokesman for whatever. I think it's I don't know if it's the Eastern Theater Command or what the full name, but they always come out and make a statement like that, where they'll say that the Americans are causing all this instability and are a threat to cross-strait peace, and are, like I said, making the region much more dangerous than it needs to be. But it's very weird because if you read the reporting, they go, well, we're taking data from, they're talking about sending congressional delegations to Taiwan, putting more and more military assets into the region, warplanes and warships, as we've been reporting on the show and talking about and writing about. And they also say that the passages through the Taiwan Strait, weapons sales, and how does China react? So they're going to make an algorithm based on how they've been reacting to these different American action and allied actions over the last year, less than 2 years. As if, like you said, there hasn't been a war yet. So I imagine the algorithm is going to play out where it's like, well, they'll, that sounds very troubling, because it sounds like you could just justify continuing and maybe even escalating these policies because, frankly, the Chinese have been restrained so far with all these different actions. So based on what they've done in the past, you look at the exponential increase in activity. Biden has more than doubled the warplanes and spy planes around China and the South China Sea, the Yellow Sea, and the East China Sea. So the data from 2020 varies compared with 2021. So, and I expect things to only get worse in this vein next year. So, yeah, it sounds very, very troubling. And it sounds like they're just going to find a way to plug in an algorithm that suggests that we can keep doing whatever we want, basically, and get away with it.
Right. I do want to mention, Connor, that there was a meeting between U.S. and Chinese military officials this past week. And while it doesn't seem like any great news came out of it or anything, it's good that these meetings are happening. I want to talk about the Peng Shuai situation just for a second. She's a Chinese tennis star that was, by the U.S. and Western media, alleged to have made accusations of sexual misconduct against a higher-ranking member of the Chinese Communist Party, an older man, and then was, I guess, accused by the media of being hidden by the Chinese state, and basically, I don't know what they're quite saying, like she's being used by the Chinese Communist Party or anything, but she has now come out, and it's being portrayed in the American media as she is now walking back her her accusation of sexual assault against the older party official. And so I actually took the time, Connor, and I read 3 different translations of the statement that Peng Shuai allegedly put on, I think it's called WeChat, the Chinese social network, or mainly Chinese social network. I don't know who all uses it around the world, but I think mostly is people in China. And so certainly, like, what happened between her and the official was gross behavior on his part, at the very least. He's an older man. He has an appointment set up to play tennis with her. He's with his wife. And then after they play tennis, he makes a proposal to her to have a sexual relationship or something. I believe so. This is where like the translations get like a little different, but it sounds to me like, from reading it in English, what she is saying is that he made advances. She initially rejected him, and I think felt very conflicted about it, and felt like very disgusted, and like felt wrong because like his wife was on board, and this is a young woman with an older couple, right? So this is a weird situation for her to be in. Eventually she develops a sexual relationship with this guy, and there's a part where she says something about like something happened with the guard outside the door. Now this could in a way be read as, I felt trapped. But if you actually read the statement, it sounds like what she is saying is like, I didn't expect like a romantic relationship to happen like this. And, she in the letter lays out like positive aspects of their relationship. And a lot of it is, I think, her like feeling like basically this is an older man who showed a lot of attention on like an academic, personal level, not just sexual level to this young girl. But I think for him, it was like, if you read her letter, it seems like it was only sexual, right? Like he was just playing her. Like he was using her for sets and like, being like, you're so special. I'm going to teach you these, great lessons in life, and mentoring with me is, and she has like this conflict because like she's like says something, am I a bad woman in there because, she's having an affair with a married man, and yet he's like, his wife's on board with it. Like, obviously this is a really terrible situation for her to be in. And I'm not saying that there's not issues with that kind of behavior. But if you're looking at like what's happening in the United States with like even the Ghislaine Maxwell trial, this woman isn't underage. And so even if this, is predatory behavior, I don't even think if it happened in the United States, it would be considered illegal in any sense of the word. Again, gross. Yeah, I don't like it. And, depending on where it was between her being, just easily influenced young woman being taken advantage of for sets versus, being groomed. I guess it sounds a little bit less like it from the letter that she put out. Just it doesn't. But maybe that's my misreading it. That was more, a shorter thing than her, like, slowly being groomed or anything like that. But again, I don't want to make any judgments. But certainly the U.S. mainstream media has bent what she initially put out into saying that this is China's Me Too, an accusation of sexual assault. And it's not clear that that's the case, and that's not clear what she's saying. And, they're really just taking advantage of this young woman's statement to demonize an entire society. And I'm sure, that has to make things even more difficult for her because, if she is somewhat of a Chinese patriot, I don't know. But let's say that she, doesn't like project this one CCP member's actions against her, even if they are the worst, onto the entire Chinese Communist Party or the Chinese society as the Americans would like you to have it. Then this could like be really harming her in the way of like you're taking her sexual abuse story and using it for your own political narrative. Maybe she feels like she can't come out and say I was sexually assaulted now, or give a more detailed statement because she feels like it would be used against her country. Right? Like this is really messed up what they're doing to this woman. And so, after she made the statement initially, I don't want to say like she disappeared or anything like that, but she didn't have a public appearance. Now, I have no idea how often, like any tennis star, I have no idea how often Serena Williams is in public. And I'm pretty sure it was Venus Williams, the older sister, who like ran over somebody or was in a car accident and somebody ended up dying. But either way, it's a very serious car accident, right? If she was then like not seen in public for 2 weeks, I don't think that would be a scandal at all, right? This is a tennis player, not to like diminish female tennis in any way, but even like the Williams sisters, like aren't the biggest names in the United States, right? They're not Joe Biden or Kamala Harris or anything like that. And so I don't know. They made way too big of a deal about where she was. She made public statements. She talked to the IOC. She talked to the women's tennis players. I think it's the WTP. I don't know exactly what it stands for. And they keep saying, oh no, she's like being used by the CCP and they're brainwashing her or something. And I don't know. It all seems just very nefarious to me, Connor. And I don't have like again want to like draw some verdict and say like this is exactly what happened. I definitely know, but there's a lot more nuance than is being portrayed in the U.S. mainstream media. I don't know if you have anything on this, or if you're a fan of women's tennis that I had no idea about, know like why this woman is so important or anything like that.
No, I just noticed that it's. I mean, no, I'm glad you mentioned the Ghislaine Maxwell trial because it's such a it's like peak hypocrisy to be. They're really almost yeah, as I saw Caitlin Johnstone interact with, or at least comment under Judd Apatow tweet, where he quote tweeted the Associated Press talking about her, an article about her denial of some of these claims, and then he goes, "I'm scared for her," and she was like, "Believe all women, unless not believing them helps promote Western imperial agendas," and this kind of thing. And it's just like, yeah, I mean, I've seen, I believe, Tim Pool and some of the mainstream sort of coverage of this, and it's all just extremely hyperbolic, and I don't know, it seems like it's just one more like lame story after another to use against China for all this stuff. But yeah, I think you essentially covered it. It's just I'm continue to be surprised how they can take a story like this and turn it into a major international incident and keep it going for like weeks and weeks.
Just real quick before we move on to Iran stuff here, Connor, I want to mention that Nicholas Burns was approved by the Senate to become ambassador to China. Rahm Emanuel was approved by the Senate to become ambassador to Japan. The biggest issue in his hearing was not anything to do with foreign policy, but his cover-up of the police murdering I believe his name was Laquan McDonald. If you remember, this is the video of the Chicago police officers, and this kid is, several yards away from the officers, and they shoot him, and Emmanuel helped cover up the killing. And then the last one here is the U.S. named the Undersecretary of State, Yurza Zenya, to be the special coordinator for Tibet. And the reason this is significant is it would be like China naming a special coordinator to Cherokee Nation or something like that. In that, China feels like this is an internal China issue. And, if China is, let's say, making a big stink about how Black Americans are unfairly treated in the inner cities, we fairly recognize it as hypocrisy. And, that being like kind of a silly complaint for China to make. Like, worry about your own human rights abuses before you come yelling about what happens in our prisons. Like, I'll complain about that just enough for you. Thank you very much, JJP. But at the same time, let's here, look at what's happening in Tibet and just make that the biggest deal in the world. So naming this woman the undersecretary will certainly probably ramp up tensions there. But Connor, let's move on.